October 1887, Athens County. Ohio, the autumn wind whispered through the bare branches as Samuel Mercer's carriage approached the Johnson estate. The weathered Victorian mansion loomed against the gray sky, its windows like vacant eyes staring down at him. At 32, Samuel had never expected to inherit property, especially not from a distant relative he'd barely heard of. "Here we are, sir," the driver announced, his voice betraying unease. "Johnson Manor." Samuel gathered his coat against the chill. "You needn't wait. I plan to stay the night." The driver shifted uncomfortably. "I wouldn't recommend that, sir. This place has ... stories." "Old houses always do," Samuel replied dismissively. "I'll need transportation tomorrow at noon." Reluctantly, the driver nodded and helped unload Samuel's trunk. As the carriage departed, Samuel stood alone before the imposing structure that was now his, listening to the sound of hooves fade into the distance. The door creaked open before Samuel could knock. A thin man with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to sink into his skull stood in the doorway. "Mr. Mercer, I presume." "I am Thaddeus Webb, caretaker of Johnson Manor. Please come in." His voice was as dry as autumn leaves. The interior smelled of dust and something Samuel couldn't quite identify, something old and stagnant. Faded portraits lined the entrance hall, stern-faced Johnsons from generations past. "Your great-uncle Elliot left explicit instructions regarding his estate," Webb explained, leading Samuel through the main corridor. "The solicitor will arrive tomorrow with the necessary documents. Until then, I've prepared the master bedroom for your stay." "My great-uncle," Samuel mused. "I never met the man. What was he like?" Webb's expression remained impassive. "Mr. Johnson was a private individual, devout. The family has deep roots in this community. The baptismal font in the local church bears the Johnson name and what of his immediate family. I understood he had children." A flicker of something, hesitation, fear, crossed Webb's face. "Mr. Johnson outlived his wife and children. A tragic series of circumstances." As they ascended the grand staircase, Samuel noticed a corridor on the second floor where the wallpaper appeared fresher than the surrounding areas. At the end stood a door newer than the others, with an elaborate lock. "What's down there?" Samuel asked. Webb's hand tightened on the banister. "The nursery. It remains as it was when it's kept locked by Mr. Johnson's instructions." "I see," Samuel replied, though he didn't. "And as the new owner, I presume I'll have access to all rooms?" "The keys will be transferred with the estate tomorrow," Webb answered stiffly. "Though some places, Mr. Mercer, are better left undisturbed. Dinner will be served at 6. I'll leave you to settle in." Left alone in the master bedroom, Samuel examined his surroundings. The furniture was expensive but dated, the air thick with neglect. On the mantelpiece sat a daguerreotype of a stern-faced Manalea Johnson, presumably standing beside a woman holding an infant. As Samuel unpacked his belongings, he heard it so faint he almost missed it. The sound of a baby crying, distant but unmistakable, followed by soft footsteps. He moved to the door, listening. The corridor was empty, the crying stopped. "Just the wind," he murmured to himself, though the air was perfectly still inside. That night at dinner, Samuel attempted conversation with the taciturn caretaker. "The townspeople seem to know this house," he ventured. The driver appeared. "Reluctant to leave me here." Webb poured wine without meeting Samuel's gaze. "People talk, sir. Rural communities breed superstition." "About what exactly?" "Nothing worth repeating." Webb placed the wine bottle down with finality, though I would advise against mentioning the Johnson name in town. Some wounds haven't healed. Later, as Samuel lay in bed, the old house creaking around him, he heard it again, a child's soft whimper, followed by a gentle shushing. He sat up, listening intently. The sounds came from beyond his wall, from the direction of the locked nursery. Samuel struck a match, lit his lamp, and moved to the door. The corridor was draped in shadows, the locked nursery door visible at its end. As he watched, a pale light seemed to glow beneath it, then vanished. He took 3 steps toward it before the floorboard's creak halted him. The light disappeared, and with it, the sounds. Samuel returned to bed unsettled, listening to the house's whispers until exhaustion claimed him. In his dreams, he stood before the locked door as it slowly opened, revealing not a nursery but a baptismal font, its water dark and still, with something floating just beneath the surface. Samuel woke to gray light filtering through heavy curtains. The events of the previous night seemed dreamlike now, though a lingering unease remained. After dressing, he ventured downstairs, finding Webb preparing breakfast in the kitchen. "I trust you slept well?" Webb asked, his tone suggesting he knew otherwise. "Well enough," Samuel lied. "Tell me, Webb, are there children in the house?" The caretaker's movement stilled. "No, sir. Not for many years." "I thought I heard ... of all quotes," Samuel began, but Webb's expression stopped him. Never mind. I understand the solicitor arrives today. At noon, Webb confirmed. Until then, perhaps you'd like to familiarize yourself with the estate. The library contains family records that might interest you. The library was an impressive room lined with leather-bound volumes. Mahogany shelves reached toward a coffered ceiling, and a massive desk dominated the center. Samuel browsed the shelves, discovering books on theology, natural science, and local history. On a lower shelf, he found a series of leather-bound journals labeled with years, his great-uncle's diaries. Samuel selected one from 1872 and began reading. Elliot Johnson wrote with rigid precision, documenting daily affairs, church attendance, and business matters. Between mundane entries, Samuel found references to births, baptisms, and with disturbing frequency, infant deaths. April 15, 1872, Martha Wilson's child baptized today. The ceremony proceeded as established. By evening, word came that the infant had expired. The town whispers, but they do not understand God's purpose. The nursery has received another. Samuel felt a chill. He pulled more journals, scanning through years of similar entries. Every few months, a baptism followed by an infant's death, always with that same phrase. The nursery has received another. His great-uncle had presided over these baptisms as a church elder, but something about the detached way he recorded these tragedies struck Samuel as deeply wrong. He continued reading, discovering that Eliot's own children had died in infancy, all three of them. The final journal ended abruptly in January 1887, 9 months before Eliot's own death. A sound from the doorway startled Samuel. Webb stood watching him, eyes narrowed. "The solicitor has arrived early, sir." Samuel closed the journal. "Webb, what happened to the infants in this town? So many deaths after baptisms, it can't be coincidence." "Infant mortality was common in rural areas, Mr. Mercer. Poor medical care, harsh conditions." Webb's explanations sounded rehearsed. "The solicitor's waiting in the drawing room. Mr. Blackwood, the solicitor, was a portly man with shrewd eyes. He explained the terms of the inheritance, the estate, a modest fortune, and all its contents now belonged to Samuel. With one condition: the property must remain in the family for at least 20 years, and certain rooms were to remain undisturbed." "Which rooms?" Samuel asked. "Only one specifically," Blackwood replied, consulting his papers. "The nursery on the second floor. Mr. Johnson was most insistent about this point. The room is to remain locked and undisturbed, and if I choose not to honor this condition—" Blackwood's expression hardened. "Then the estate passes to the church, and you receive nothing." After the solicitor departed, leaving the keys and documents in Samuel's possession, he confronted Webb. "What happened in that nursery, and why was my uncle so determined to keep it locked?" Webb's face remained impassive. "Mr. Johnson had his reasons, sir. I'd advise respecting his wishes." "I intend to open that room," Samuel declared. "I wouldn't recommend that, sir." "It wasn't a request, Webb. I want to know what my family has been hiding." Webb's eyes held a warning. "Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Tonight is All Hallows Eve, Mr. Mercer. In this house, on this night, I strongly advise waiting until morning." Samuel fingered the iron key to the nursery. "I'll open it when I choose. This is my house now." As Webb departed, Samuel returned to the library, determined to find more answers before confronting whatever lay behind that locked door. In a dusty corner, he discovered parish records his great-uncle had apparently removed from the church baptismal records spanning decades. Each baptism of an infant who later died had been performed by Elliot Johnson himself, using what the records called the Old Way, a notation that appeared in no other baptismal record. Samuel noticed another pattern. Every death occurred exactly 3 days after baptism. The infants found lifeless in their cribs with no mark or sign of illness. The town had eventually grown suspicious. The final pages contained minutes from a church meeting where parishioners demanded Elliot be removed from his position. The record ended abruptly, with no resolution noted. As dusk fell, Samuel heard it again, the soft crying of an infant, now joined by another and another, a chorus of gentle weeping coming from behind the locked nursery door. The crying had stopped by morning, leaving Samuel bleary-eyed from a restless night. He needed answers from someone other than the evasive caretaker. After breakfast, he rode into Athens proper, a small but respectable town with brick storefronts and a white-steepled church at its center. The townspeople eyed him with suspicion as he tied his horse outside the general store. Inside, conversation halted when he entered. "Good morning," he greeted the shopkeeper, a balding man with spectacles. "I'm Samuel Mercer, Elliot Johnson's great-nephew. I've recently inherited the Johnson estate." The storekeeper's expression soured. "A Johnson in different clothing is still a Johnson." "I understand there's some history," Samuel said carefully. I'm trying to learn the truth about my great-uncle's involvement with certain incidents. We don't speak of that here, the man replied stiffly. You'd best leave town before sundown. We don't want your kind here. A woman's voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Thomas. The young man isn't his uncle. She was elderly but stood straight, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, measured Samuel. You want answers about the Johnson baptisms, she stated. Come with me. Outside, she introduced herself as Agnes Holloway, the town's midwife for over 40 years. I delivered most of those babies, she said as they walked toward a modest house at the edge of town, and I was there when many of them died. Inside her home, smelling of herbs and wood smoke. Agnes served tea while Samuel explained his discovery of the journals and parish records. Elliot Johnson, she began, her voice heavy with old anger, believed he had a covenant with God. The Johnson family helped found this town, built the church, donated the baptismal font. For generations they performed baptisms, but Elliot, he revived what he called the old way. What was this old way? Samuel asked. Agnes's eyes darkened. He claimed it was from ancient scripture purification through complete immersion 3 times, using water mixed with soil from consecrated ground. But there was more to it than that. Words spoken in private, rituals performed after the public ceremony, and the children died afterward, 3 days later. Always 3 days. No marks, no illness. They simply stopped breathing. Her hands trembled slightly. I examined those babies. They were perfectly healthy, then gone. Like their souls had been collected. Samuel leaned forward. My uncle's journals mentioned the nursery receiving another after each death. What did he mean? Agnes set down her teacup. There were rumors, whispers that Elliot took something from each child during baptism, not physically but spiritually. That he somehow bound them to the house, to that room. Mothers claimed they could hear their lost babies crying from inside the Johnson estate at night. I've heard those cries, Samuel admitted. Agnes's face paled. Then it's true. God help us all. What happened to Elliot's position in the church? The records end abruptly. The town finally turned against him in '87, after 17 infants had died following his baptisms. There was a confrontation at the church. Elliot cursed the town, claiming we'd rejected God's covenant. He locked himself in that house and never emerged again. He died 9 months later, and no one investigated these deaths? The authorities? The local magistrate was Elliot's cousin, Agnes explained bitterly. The official cause was always natural decline or failure to thrive, common enough in those days not to raise suspicion beyond our town. As Samuel prepared to leave, Agnes grasped his arm with surprising strength. That nursery, whatever is locked inside, is not natural, Mr. Mercer. Elliot believed he was creating something holy, but evil done in God's name is still evil. Those children deserve rest. How do I give it to them? Samuel asked. Agnes released his arm. I don't know, but I fear what will happen if you simply open that door without preparation. Evil contained is sometimes better than evil released. On his ride back to the estate, Samuel noticed dark clouds gathering. A storm was coming. The Johnson mansion seemed to loom larger against the darkening sky, its windows watching his approach. Webb met him at the door with barely concealed hostility. You went to town, he stated. I did, Samuel replied, handing him his coat. I spoke with the midwife. Agnes Holloway spreads lies about this family. Or perhaps she's the only one willing to speak the truth, Samuel countered. Tell me, Webb, what role did you play in my uncle's old way baptisms? Webb's face hardened. I served Mr. Johnson faithfully. He was a godly man who understood sacrifice. Sacrifice? Samuel felt cold despite the warmth of the foyer. Those were innocent children. Innocents have always been the purest sacrifice, Webb replied, his voice taking on a zealous quality that hadn't been there before. Mr. Johnson understood that building a bridge to heaven required foundations laid in purity. Thunder rolled outside as rain began to pelt the windows. Samuel noticed something he'd missed before. Small, unusual symbol carved into the woodwork beside the staircase, repeated at regular intervals throughout the foyer, similar to a cross but with additional elements that made it unsettlingly different. I intend to open the nursery tonight, Samuel announced. Webb's expression changed to one of alarm. You mustn't. Not tonight of all nights. The veil is thinnest on All Hallows' Eve. That's why Mr. Johnson chose this day for his work. You have no idea what you might release. Then enlighten me, Webb. What exactly will I find behind that door? Salvation, Webb whispered. Or damnation. Mr. Johnson never was certain which. Lightning flashed, illuminating Webb's fanatical expression. In that moment, Samuel realized the caretaker was as dangerous as whatever secrets the house contained. I'll be in the library, Samuel said. I expect dinner at the usual time. As he turned to leave, Webb called after him. "They're stirring already, Mr. Mercer. Can't you hear them? They know you're going to open the door." And indeed, beneath the rumble of thunder, Samuel could hear it, the sound of many infants crying, growing louder as darkness fell over Johnson Manor. Samuel barricaded himself in the library, his mind racing. Webb's behavior confirmed his suspicions. The caretaker had been complicit in whatever ritualistic horrors his great-uncle had performed. The storm intensified outside, rain lashing against the windows as if trying to break through. Returning to the parish records, Samuel searched for anything he might have missed. In a slim volume wedged between larger tomes, he discovered Elliot Johnson's personal religious writings, a disturbing blend of Orthodox Christianity and something far older and darker. Elliot wrote of vessel children whose purity made them ideal receptacles for divine essence. The baptismal ritual he'd devised wasn't meant to cleanse sin, but to extract what he called the uncorrupted soul matter from each infant. This essence, he believed, could be collected and used to construct a conduit between earth and heaven. The nursery, Elliot wrote, was the anchor point for this conduit. Each child's essence was somehow bound to objects within that room, toys, cribs, blankets, creating a tethering effect that would eventually, with enough accumulated souls, bridge the mortal and divine realms. Samuel's horror deepened as he read Elliot's clinical descriptions of how the infants would grow listless after baptism, their vitality transferring to the objects in the nursery, which would sometimes move of their own accord or emit sounds. By the third day, the transfer would be complete, leaving empty shells where vibrant infants had been. Elliot's final entry, dated January 1887, revealed his ultimate plan. The 17th vessel completes the foundation. On All Hallows' Eve, when the barrier thins, I shall open the nursery door and step through the bridge I have constructed from innocence. Heaven awaits on the other side, not the pale imitation preached by modern ministers, but the true kingdom, accessible only to those who understand the ancient ways. Thunder cracked directly overhead, and the library doors burst open. Webb stood in the doorway, rain-soaked and wild-eyed. "It's time for dinner, Mr. Mercer," he announced, though the grandfather clock showed only 5 o'clock. "A special meal for All Hallows' Eve." Samuel noticed Webb's right hand remained hidden behind his back. "I'm not hungry, Webb. You may retire for the evening." "Oh, I insist," Webb said, revealing a gleaming carving knife. "Mr. Johnson would want his traditions observed, especially tonight." Samuel edged toward the fireplace poker. "What tradition might that be?" "The final sacrifice, of course," Webb replied, his voice unnaturally calm. Mr. Johnson never completed his work. He intended to offer himself as the keystone of the bridge, but his resolve faltered. "That's why it hasn't worked properly, why the children remain trapped between worlds. And you believe I'm to be this sacrifice?" Samuel asked, buying time as he moved closer to the poker. Webb advanced into the room. "Johnson blood is required. You're the last of the line. How fitting that you arrived just before All Hallows' Eve Providence," Mr. Johnson would call it. As lightning illuminated the room again, Samuel lunged for the poker, swinging it in a defensive arc as Webb rushed forward with the knife. The caretaker was surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance. They struggled, crashing into bookshelves, sending volumes tumbling around them. Webb pinned Samuel against the desk, the knife inching closer to his throat. "Your blood will complete the work," he hissed. "The children will be freed, and the bridge will open." With desperate strength, Samuel brought his knee up sharply, catching Webb in the stomach. The caretaker stumbled back, and Samuel struck him with the poker. Webb collapsed, the knife clattering to the floor. Samuel bound the unconscious caretaker with curtain cords and locked the library door behind him. The house seemed alive now, creaking and shifting as if under immense pressure. The crying from the nursery had intensified, joined by a new sound-soft singing, the kind a mother might use to soothe a restless child. Armed with the poker and the nursery key, Samuel ascended the staircase. The air grew colder as he approached the locked door, his breath visible in pale puffs. The singing stopped as he reached the corridor, replaced by expectant silence. The nursery key felt unnaturally heavy in his hand, almost vibrating with anticipation. As he inserted it into the lock, Samuel hesitated, remembering Agnes Holloway's warning about evil contained versus evil released, but he had come too far to turn back. The lock turned with surprising ease, as if eager to be opened after so many years. Samuel pushed the door inward, poker raised defensively before him. The nursery beyond was unlike anything he had expected. The door swung open silently, revealing a room bathed in an impossible light, neither daylight nor lamplight, but a pale, diffuse glow that seemed to emanate from the very air. The nursery was immaculately preserved. as if time had never touched it. 3 ornate cribs stood in a perfect triangle formation, their white paint unblemished. Delicate toys, porcelain dolls, wooden horses, and cloth bears were arranged on shelves with mathematical precision. The walls, painted a soft blue, were adorned with carefully rendered biblical scenes featuring infants. Moses in the bulrushes, Samuel hearing God's call, the Christ child in the manger. But something was wrong with the paintings. The infants' eyes were unnaturally large and followed Samuel as he entered, their tiny painted mouths moving silently. Most disturbing of all, the room was perfectly silent. The crying that had plagued Samuel since his arrival had ceased completely. The sudden absence of sound was more terrifying than the wailing had been. Samuel took 3 careful steps into the room, poker still raised. The temperature dropped precipitously with each step until his breath clouded before him in thick white plumes. The door behind him slammed shut with a finality that suggested it would not easily open again. "Hello?" Samuel whispered, his voice sounding flat and muffled, as if the air itself absorbed the sound. A child's ball rolled across the floor, coming to rest against his shoe, yet Samuel had seen no one push it. As he stared down at it, tiny handprints appeared in the dust on the floor around him, forming a circle as if invisible children were surrounding him. From the nearest crib came a sound, not crying now, but a soft coo, the contented noise of a waking infant. Samuel approached slowly, peering over the railing. The crib was empty of any child, containing only a small, ornately carved wooden box lined with white satin. Yet the sounds continued, stretching, yawning, the unmistakable noises of a baby stirring from sleep. Samuel reached for the box, but before his fingers could touch it, the temperature plummeted further. Frost formed on the wooden rails of the crib, spreading in intricate patterns like tiny frozen ferns. "You shouldn't touch what isn't yours." The voice, a woman's cold and precise, came from behind him. Samuel whirled around to find a figure standing by the window. She wore the severe black dress of a Victorian matron, her hair pulled tightly back, her face pallid and drawn. It took a moment for Samuel to recognize her from the daguerreotype Elizabeth Johnson, his great-uncle's wife. "You're dead," Samuel stated, his voice shaking despite himself. "Death is a boundary, not an ending," Elizabeth replied. Her form wasn't quite solid. Moonlight passed through her like water through gauze. "This room exists at the threshold between states of being." Elliot understood that children, especially infants, exist closer to that threshold naturally. "The baptisms," Samuel said. "He used them to harvest something from the children." Elizabeth's expression remained impassive. Their purity, their potential, their connection to the divine. Elliot called it soul matter, but it was more fundamental than that. He was collecting the raw essence of creation itself. As she spoke, Samuel became aware of movement throughout the room, instinct shapes forming and dissipating, like fog attempting to take human form. Small, child-sized apparitions that never quite solidified. "Where are the children now?" Samuel demanded. Agnes Holloway said 17 infants died. "They are here," Elizabeth gestured around the room, "and not here." Elliot's ritual bound them to objects in this nursery, their essence trapped in these toys, these cribs, these painted walls. Neither living nor truly dead, they exist in a state of perpetual becoming. "That's monstrous," Samuel whispered. "It was necessary," Elizabeth corrected coldly. "To build a bridge, one requires materials. Pure materials, uncorrupted by life's disappointments and sins. A bridge to where?" Elizabeth's form seemed to strengthen as she moved closer. To heaven, of course, not the insipid cloud realm of modern Christianity, but the true kingdom where power flows like rivers and those who enter become like gods. The shapes around the room grew more distinct as she spoke, small, translucent forms of infants crawling across the floor, sitting in corners, reaching up with tiny hands. Elliot failed, Elizabeth continued. He collected 17 vessels, but lost his resolve at the final step. The sacrifice of self-Johnson, blood willingly given, would have completed the bridge. Instead, he died of natural causes, his blood soaking into the earth rather than the consecrated ground of the nursery, and the children remained trapped. Samuel concluded, feeling sick. For what? A madman's delusion of godhood? Elizabeth's face hardened. You speak of things beyond your comprehension. Tonight the veil is thinnest. The work can still be completed. By sacrificing me? Is that why Webb tried to kill me? Thaddeus is an imperfect instrument. The sacrifice must be willing to have full power. Elizabeth gestured to a ceremonial knife displayed on the wall, identical to the Johnson family crest Samuel had seen throughout the house. One cut, freely chosen, would release them all and open the way. The ghostly infants were fully visible now, 17 translucent forms watching him with solemn, knowing eyes far older than their apparent years. They made no sound, but Samuel could feel their collective gaze like a physical pressure. "And if I refuse?" Samuel asked. "Then nothing changes," Elizabeth replied. "I remain. They remain, waiting for another Johnson to complete the work. Perhaps another 100 years, perhaps 1,000. Time means little on this side of existence." Samuel looked at the trapped infants, victims of his family's madness and religious fervor. Whatever his great-uncle had done had suspended these children in a terrible limbo, neither living nor allowed the peace of death. "There must be another way to free them," he insisted. Elizabeth's form flickered like a candle in a draught. "The ritual binds in blood and must be broken in blood. Johnson blood created this bridge. Only Johnson blood can complete it or destroy it." "Destroy it? That's an option?" For the first time, uncertainty crossed Elizabeth's spectral features. Elliot believed ... there was a risk. If the bridge were destroyed rather than completed, all connected to it would be severed from both realms. Oblivion, not salvation or damnation. True ending. Samuel's mind raced. Elizabeth was admitting the ritual could be undone, not just completed. But the cost would be the same. His blood, his life. And it would mean not just freeing the children, but potentially erasing them from existence. "How would I destroy it rather than complete it?" he asked carefully. Elizabeth drifted toward the window, her form growing fainter. "Intent matters in blood rituals. The knife cuts the same either way. Only the will behind it determines the outcome." Outside, the storm intensified, lightning illuminating the nursery in harsh white flashes. The ghostly infants began to stir more actively, crawling toward Samuel, their tiny hands reaching for him, their mouths opening in silent pleas. Samuel felt a terrible weight of decision descend upon him. To walk away would leave these innocents trapped for who knew how long. To sacrifice himself might complete his uncle's monstrous work and open a doorway to something dangerous beyond comprehension. Or it might free them all, including Elizabeth, who Samuel now understood was as much a victim as the infants. She had died in this house, bound to her husband's twisted ritual. The ceremonial knife gleamed on the wall, seeming to call to him. Samuel took a step toward it, then stopped as he heard a commotion from downstairs, wood splintering, a man's shout. Webb had freed himself. The sounds of Webb's approach grew louder, heavy footfalls on the stairs, angry muttering that echoed through the house. Samuel turned to Elizabeth's spectral form, which had begun to fade. "He's coming," Samuel said urgently. "Tell me the truth. What happens if he reaches this room?" Elizabeth's voice grew distant. "Thaddeus believes, as Elliot did, that Johnson blood will complete the bridge. But the sacrifice must be willing for the ritual to succeed. Forced blood merely strengthens the binding." The ghostly infants began to wail silently, their mouths open in distress, though no sound emerged. They retreated from the door, gathering around the 3 cribs. Samuel made his decision. He crossed to the wall and took down the ceremonial knife, its blade inscribed with symbols matching those he'd seen throughout the house. The handle fit his palm as if made for it, the metal cold against his skin. "Need to know exactly how to destroy the bridge," Samuel insisted. "No more riddles." Elizabeth's form stabilized momentarily. The ritual creates a triangle, 3 points of connection represented by the 3 cribs. Elliot used the baptismal font to extract the essence, then bound it here through objects placed in each crib. Destroy those objects with Johnson blood while rejecting the path to godhood, and the bridge collapses. The nursery door shuddered under a heavy impact. Webb's voice came through, distorted with rage and religious fervor. "Mercer, the hour approaches. The sacrifice must be made." Samuel moved to the first crib. Inside, alongside the wooden box he'd noticed earlier, lay a child's christening gown, yellowed with age but immaculately preserved. In the second crib was a silver baptismal cup engraved with the Johnson family crest. The third contained a leather-bound Bible, open to passages that had been heavily annotated in Elliot's precise handwriting. "These objects, they're the anchors?" Samuel asked. Elizabeth nodded, her form growing transparent as Webb continued his assault on the door. "The garment receives purity, the cup holds divinity, the word channels power. Together they form the foundation. 17 souls bound through these objects, waiting for the keystone." The door splintered at the hinges. Samuel had only moments to act. "What do I do?" "Blood freely given with the intent to destroy, not complete," Elizabeth whispered. "1 drop on each anchor while renouncing the bridge." Webb broke through, his face bloodied from his earlier fall, eyes wild with fanatical purpose. He carried a fireplace poker similar to the one Samuel had used against him. "Step away from the sacred objects, Mercer. Webb commanded. Your blood belongs to the ritual. This ends tonight, Webb, Samuel replied, raising the knife. These children deserve peace. Webb lunged forward, but stopped abruptly at the threshold of the triangle formed by the cribs. An invisible barrier seemed to hold him back, the ritual's protection of its anchors. You don't understand what's at stake, Webb pleaded, his voice suddenly desperate. Elliot Johnson glimpsed the true face of God, not the benevolent father of Sunday sermons, but the awesome creator who demands worthy sacrifice. With the bridge completed, we could enter the kingdom directly, no death required. At the cost of 17 innocent lives, Samuel countered. Children who never had a chance to live. Vessels, Webb corrected, pushing against the invisible barrier. Their purpose was always to serve as vessels. Even in traditional baptism, the child symbolizes rebirth. Elliot merely made literal what was always metaphorical. The spectral infants had gathered behind Samuel now. 17 translucent forms watching with ancient eyes. Elizabeth's form had almost completely faded, but her voice remained, a whisper in Samuel's ear. Decide, Samuel Mercer, complete the work or destroy it. Dawn approaches, and with it the closing of the veil. Samuel looked at the knife in his hand, then at the desperate caretaker, and finally at the ghostly children whose lives had been stolen by his family's madness. He made his choice. I renounce this bridge and all it stands for, he declared, drawing the blade across his palm. Blood welled up, bright red in the nursery's strange light. Webb howled in protest, throwing himself against the barrier with renewed fury. No, you doom us all to separation from divinity. Samuel let one drop of blood fall onto the christening gown in the first crib. I reject the path to godhood through innocent suffering. The gown began to smolder, though no actual flame appeared. Moving to the second crib, he allowed another drop to fall into the silver cup. I deny that divinity requires sacrifice of the innocent. The cup tarnished instantly, blackening from the inside out. As Samuel approached the third crib, Webb managed to breach the barrier, staggering into the triangle with murderous intent. I won't let you destroy our salvation, he cried, raising the poker. Samuel turned, blood dripping from his hand, and faced the caretaker. Elliot Johnson was a monster who murdered children for his own ambition. If there is a God, he would never demand such a price. Blasphemer! Webb swung the poker, catching Samuel across the shoulder. Pain exploded through his arm, but he remained standing, clutching the knife. The ghostly infants moved then, their translucent forms flowing around Webb like water, impeding his movement, though they couldn't physically touch him. Their silent screams became visible as frost in the air, forming crystalline patterns that momentarily blinded the caretaker. Samuel seized the opportunity. He lunged for the third crib and let a final drop of his blood fall onto the open Bible. I break this bridge in the name of mercy, not power. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Bible's pages began to blacken and curl, not burning but simply ceasing to exist. A low rumbling shook the nursery. Plaster raining down from the ceiling, the room convulsed as if the house itself were in agony. Cracks spider-webbed across the ceiling and walls. The carefully painted biblical scenes splitting apart, painted infants' faces contorting in silent screams. The unnatural light that had filled the nursery pulsed erratically, brightening to blinding intensity before plunging into near darkness. "What have you done?" Webb shrieked, dropping to his knees as the floor beneath him undulated. "You've condemned us all." Samuel steadied himself against the third crib, his bleeding hand leaving crimson smears on the wood. The anchor objects, the christening gown, the silver cup, and the Bible were disintegrating, not into ash but into nothingness, leaving perfect voids in the fabric of reality. The spectral infants had begun to change. Their translucent forms grew more solid with each pulse of light, features becoming distinct crowned cheeks, button noses, wisps of hair. Samuel could see 17 unique children now, ranging from newborns to infants nearly a year old, all watching him with eyes that held impossible wisdom. Elizabeth's form had reappeared, stronger than before, standing at the center of the triangle formed by the cribs. Her expression was a complex mixture of fear and relief. "The bridge collapses," she announced, her voice somehow audible above the rumbling destruction. "All bonds will break. All tethers will sever." Webb scrambled toward her, reaching out with desperate hands. "Mistress Johnson, stop him. Everything your husband worked for." "My husband was wrong," Elizabeth interrupted, her voice suddenly clear of the cold detachment that had characterized it before. "I followed him in life and in death because I believed his vision. But I've watched these children suffer between worlds for too long." She turned to Samuel. "Finish it. Set us all free." The house shuddered more violently. From downstairs came the sounds of breaking glass and splintering wood as windows shattered and floorboards warped. The storm outside had intensified to supernatural proportions, lightning striking repeatedly around the property as if targeting the mansion specifically. Webb made one final desperate lunge toward Samuel, but the floor between them split open, creating an impassable chasm. The caretaker teetered on the edge, arms windmilling. "The kingdom was within our reach," he cried. "We could have ascended without dying." "There is no bridge to heaven, Webb," Samuel replied, clutching his wounded shoulder. "Only the natural passage of life and death that we all must follow." The chasm widened, and with a terrible cry, Webb fell backwards into the darkness below, his scream fading as he disappeared from sight. The ghostly children had begun to glow, each small form becoming a point of brilliant light. They circled Samuel, their tiny hands reaching toward him not in supplication now, but in something like gratitude. One by one they rose toward the ceiling, passing through it like mist through a screen, leaving trails of luminescence in their wake. Elizabeth watched them ascend, tears streaming down her spectral face. "They go to their rest at last," she whispered. 17 souls released from torment. "And you?" Samuel asked. "Are you freed as well?" Elizabeth's form had begun to dissolve around the edges, fragments of her essence drifting upward like embers from a dying fire. "I bound myself to this place willingly, to watch over them. My husband thought he was creating a paradise, but he built a prison instead." She looked at Samuel with eyes that were becoming pure light. "Thank you for having the courage to destroy what we created." The nursery was collapsing more rapidly now, walls folding inward like paper in a flame. Samuel realized he needed to escape before the entire structure came down around him. He staggered toward the door, navigating around widening fissures in the floor. "The house won't survive the breaking of the bridge," Elizabeth called after him. "It was built to contain the ritual. Without it, nothing will remain." Samuel paused at the threshold, looking back one last time. Elizabeth stood amid the destruction, her form almost completely light now, the severe Victorian dress and tight-pulled hair dissolving into radiance. "Was any of it real?" Samuel asked. "The bridge, the kingdom, was it all just madness?" Elizabeth's voice came from everywhere and nowhere as her human form disappeared entirely. "The boundary between faith and madness has always been thin." Elliot glimpsed something beyond the veil, whether divine or terrible, I cannot say, but the suffering he caused was undeniably real. With those words, she vanished completely, a final surge of light briefly illuminating the disintegrating room before fading away. Samuel ran. The corridor outside the nursery was buckling, the floor rising and falling like the deck of a ship in a storm. He half ran, half fell down the grand staircase as banisters snapped and steps collapsed behind him. The foyer was unrecognizable, furniture overturned, chandeliers shattered on the floor, family portraits burning with smokeless flames. The front door had jammed in its warped frame. Samuel threw himself against it repeatedly until it splintered outward, propelling him onto the gravel drive beyond. He scrambled to his feet and ran toward the gates, not daring to look back until he'd reached what he hoped was a safe distance. When he finally turned, the sight stole his breath. Johnson Manor was imploding, collapsing in on itself as if being devoured from within. The walls bent inward at impossible angles, windows shattering in sequence from top to bottom. The roof caved with a sound like thunder, sending up a plume of dust that glowed with an internal light. At the center of the destruction, a pillar of radiance shot upward into the night sky, 17 distinct streams of light, twining together before dissipating among the stars. Then, with a final groan of tortured wood and stone, the entire structure collapsed into rubble. The supernatural storm ceased abruptly, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the settling of debris and Samuel's ragged breathing. Dawn was breaking on the horizon, the first rays of sunlight illuminating the ruins of Johnson Manor, where the imposing Victorian mansion had stood for generations. Only a pile of broken stone and splintered wood remained. As the light strengthened, Samuel saw something remarkable. Wildflowers were already pushing through the wreckage, blooming impossibly in the November chill, creating a carpet of life where death and suffering had reigned. Samuel sank to his knees, exhaustion and pain overwhelming him. His hand still bled from the ritual cut, and Webb's blow had likely fractured his shoulder. But he was alive, and more importantly, 17 innocent souls had finally found peace. As consciousness slipped away, Samuel thought he heard the distant laughter of children playing, not the eerie, silent cries that had haunted the nursery, but joyful sounds of release and freedom. Samuel awakened to the clean scent of carbolic acid and laundered sheets. He blinked against harsh daylight streaming through unfamiliar windows, gradually recognizing his surroundings as a hospital ward. His wounded hand was bandaged, his shoulder immobilized in a splint. "He's awake, doctor," called a nurse who had been monitoring him from a chair nearby. A gray-haired physician approached, peering at Samuel over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Mr. Mercer, good to see you rejoining us. You've been unconscious for 2 days." Samuel's throat felt like sandpaper. "How did I get here?" "Farmer found you at the edge of his property, half frozen and bleeding," the doctor explained, checking Samuel's pupils. "Said you must have walked nearly 3 miles from the Johnson place in that condition. It's a miracle you survived the exposure." Memories flooded back, the collapsing house, the spirits ascending, the dawn breaking over ruins. The Johnson estate destroyed, the doctor confirmed. Strangest thing. No fire, but the entire structure collapsed in on itself. Nothing left but rubble and peculiarly wildflowers growing throughout the wreckage. He lowered his voice. "Between us, the town's not exactly a mourning. That place had a dark reputation. And Webb, Thaddeus Webb, the caretaker?" The doctor's expression turned grave. "Found beneath the debris. The only casualty, thankfully." He hesitated. "Though I must say the coroner's report noted some unusual findings. The body showed signs of having aged decades in an instant. Hair turned completely white, skin severely wrinkled, almost as if something had drained the life from him." A chill ran through Samuel despite the warm hospital room. "I need to speak with Agnes Holloway, the midwife." "She's been here daily, checking on you," the nurse interjected. "Said she knew you'd wake today. Peculiar old woman, but respected in town." As if summoned by her name, Agnes appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in Samuel's condition. The doctor excused himself, leaving them alone save for the nurse, who retreated to a discreet distance. Agnes settled into the chair beside Samuel's bed. "You destroyed it," she stated without preamble. "The nursery. The ritual. All of it. How do you know?" Her weathered face softened. "The mothers know. Every woman who lost a child to Elliot Johnson's baptisms felt it 2 nights ago. A lifting. A release. Like putting down a burden carried so long they'd forgotten the weight of it." She reached into her pocket, withdrawing a small pouch. 17 mothers gathered yesterday at the ruins. Each brought a memento of their lost child, a lock of hair, a tiny shoe, a teething ring. "We buried them where the nursery stood." Samuel swallowed hard. "The children. I saw them ascend. They're at peace now." Agnes nodded, unsurprised. "The town feels it. Even those who don't know the full story sense the change. Like a shadow lifted after generations." She leaned closer. "But I need to know what happened, Samuel. All of it. For the town records. To prevent such a thing from ever happening again." Samuel recounted everything: Elliot's journals, the ritual's purpose, Elizabeth's revelations, and his decision to destroy rather than complete the bridge. Agnes listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as pieces of a long puzzled mystery fell into place. "Elliot Johnson always claimed to have found ancient texts during his theological studies abroad," she said when he finished. "Fragments of rituals predating Christianity that supposedly revealed direct pathways to divine power. Most dismissed it as scholarly eccentricity. Until the baptisms began and children started dying. He believed he was creating something holy," Samuel said. "A bridge to heaven that would allow passage without death." "Many atrocities have been committed by those who believed they served a higher purpose," Agnes replied grimly. "The road to hell and all that." She studied him closely. "You're the last of the Johnson line now. What will you do?" Samuel hadn't considered his future beyond surviving the night at the manor. "I don't know. Sell the land, perhaps. Donate the proceeds to the families affected. The land may never be buildable again," Agnes warned. Already stories spread about lights seen among the ruins at night. The flowers blooming in November. People saying prayers at the edge of the property. "Sacred ground," Samuel murmured, remembering Elizabeth's words. "Consecrated by suffering and release." Agnes nodded. "Perhaps that's what it should remain, a memorial to those 17 children. A reminder of the dangers of fanaticism disguised as faith." She rose to leave. "Rest now. We can discuss the practicalities when you're stronger." After she departed, Samuel drifted between wakefulness and slumber. In his dreams, he walked through a meadow of impossible flowers, following the sound of children's laughter. 17 small figures played among the blooms, their faces bright with joy, no longer trapped in that terrible limbo between worlds. Elizabeth Johnson was there too, watching over them with a mother's protective gaze, her spectral form now solid and real in this dream space. She smiled at Samuel as he approached. "You did the right thing," she told him, "breaking the bridge rather than completing it." "What would have happened if I'd finished Elliot's work?" Samuel asked. Elizabeth's expression darkened. "Something would have come through. but not what my husband expected. The divine and the infernal are closer than most realize, and Elliot's ritual did not discriminate between them. He glimpsed power beyond the veil and assumed it wholly. And now there is peace. She gestured to the playing children. Not heaven as religions conceive it, perhaps, but release from suffering. Rest. The natural order restored. Samuel awoke with tears on his cheeks and a sense of completion he couldn't articulate. Outside his hospital window, the first snow of winter had begun to fall, covering the town in a blanket of pristine white nature's own ritual of purification. By December, Samuel had recovered enough to leave the hospital. The town of Athens had transformed its relationship with him during his convalescence. What had begun as suspicion another. Johnson arriving to continue his family's dark legacy had evolved into a cautious respect. Word had spread, likely from Agnes, about Samuel's role in ending the curse that had shadowed the community for generations. On his first day of true freedom, Samuel visited the ruins of Johnson Manor. The winter snow had covered much of the debris, creating smooth white mounds where walls had stood. Impossibly, the wildflowers continued to bloom despite the frost, pushing through the snow with vibrant petals that seemed to glow with an internal light. 17 small markers had been placed in a perfect circle where the nursery had been, simple wooden crosses bearing the names and dates of the lost children. In the center stood a single stone monument with an inscription, "For the innocents whose lives were taken but whose souls are now free, 187018887. Townspeople had left offerings, small toys, ribbons, winterberries around each marker. Samuel noticed Agnes Holloway standing at the edge of the property, watching him. "The mothers come daily," she said as he approached. "They say they can feel their children's presence here now, not trapped as before, but peaceful, free." "What will happen to the land?" Samuel asked. "That's for you to decide. You're still the legal owner." Samuel looked back at the memorial, at the improbable flowers defying winter. "I want to donate it to the town with the condition that it remains a memorial garden. No building, no development, just a place of remembrance and healing." Agnes nodded approvingly. "A fitting atonement for your family's sins, though they weren't yours to bear." "We inherit more than money and land from our ancestors," Samuel replied. "Their debts of conscience fall to us as well." In the weeks that followed, Samuel worked with the town council to establish the Johnson Memorial Garden as a protected site. He used the modest fortune that had come with his inheritance to establish a fund for its maintenance, and to provide compensation to the 17 families who had lost children to Elliot's baptismal ritual. The parish records in Elliot's journals, which Samuel had removed from the library before the house's destruction, were carefully transcribed, then ceremonially burned in the town square under Agnes Holloway's supervision. The knowledge they contained was too dangerous to preserve, but too important to forget entirely. Agnes would serve as the keeper of this oral history, passing it to her apprentice when the time came. As winter deepened, Samuel found himself drawn repeatedly to the garden. The flowers never withered, though botanists from the University in Columbus could not identify their species or explain their resistance to frost. On still nights, visitors reported hearing children's laughter among the ruins, though no one ever found footprints in the snow beside their own. Samuel had taken lodging at the town's small hotel while deciding his future. One evening in late December, as he sat by the fire in the common room, the hotel proprietor approached with a letter. "Delivered today from New York," the man explained. "Addressed to you, care of our establishment." The letter was from a Professor James Whitcomb of Columbia University's Theological Seminary. It read, "Mr. Mercer, news of the unusual circumstances surrounding the Johnson estate has reached academic circles. As a scholar of comparative religious practices and their historical manifestations, I find myself intrigued by accounts of your great-uncle's rituals and their tragic consequences. I understand you may be reluctant to revisit such painful events, but I believe documenting this case could serve as a crucial warning against religious fanaticism and the exploitation of the vulnerable in the name of faith. If you would consider meeting to discuss these events, I will be traveling to Ohio after the new year and could easily arrange a stop in Athens. With sincere respect, James Whitcomb, Ph.D., Professor of Theological History, Columbia University." Samuel stared at the letter, uncertain how to respond. Agnes had warned him that word might spread beyond Athens, attracting those curious about the supernatural events at Johnson Manor. Some would come seeking knowledge. Others power, and discerning between them would not be easy. He was still contemplating his response when a young boy burst into the hotel, red-faced from running in the cold. "Mr. Mercer, come quick. Something's happening at the garden." Samuel grabbed his coat and followed the boy through snow-covered streets. A small crowd had gathered at the edge of the property, pointing and murmuring. As Samuel pushed his way forward, he saw what had drawn them. The garden was alight, not with fire, but with a gentle radiance that emanated from the flowers in the 17 markers. The light pulsed softly, like heartbeats, each marker glowing in a different hue. Above the central monument, the air shimmered as if heated, forming what appeared to be a doorway of pure light. As the townspeople watched in awe, 17 small figures became visible within the light. The spirits of the children, more distinct than Samuel had ever seen them. They stood hand in hand in a circle around a woman Samuel recognized as Elizabeth Johnson, her severe Victorian appearance now softened, her face peaceful. She looked directly at Samuel and smiled. Then, one by one, the children released each other's hands and stepped through the shimmering doorway, each small form dissolving into the light. Elizabeth was the last to go, pausing to place her hand over her heart in a gesture of gratitude before she too passed beyond the veil. The doorway contracted to a single point of brilliance, then vanished completely. The garden's glow subsided to a soft luminescence, the flowers returning to their natural state, though still improbably blooming in the snow. Agnes Holloway had appeared beside Samuel. "It's done," she said quietly. "Truly done now. They've found their way to whatever awaits beyond." "But the flowers remain," Samuel observed. "The memorial, as it should. Some places become sacred through suffering and redemption. This is such a place." She glanced at him. "You felt it, didn't you, of the completion?" Samuel nodded. Townspeople had added benches, pathways, and a small fountain where the front entrance of the mansion had once stood. Samuel Mercer, now a familiar and respected figure in Athens, walked the garden's paths daily. He had decided to remain in town, purchasing a modest house near the square and taking a position as assistant librarian at the university. His quiet, scholarly nature suited the work, and few of his colleagues knew of his connection to the Johnson legacy exactly as he preferred it. On this particular morning, Samuel sat on a bench near the 17 markers, which had been replaced with more permanent stone monuments through donations from the townspeople. He was reading when a shadow fell across his page. Looking up, he found a well-dressed gentleman with a neatly trimmed beard standing before him. "Mr. Mercer, I presume?" The man extended his hand. "James Whitcomb, Columbia University. I hope you'll forgive the unexpected visit, but I found myself unable to accept the dismissal in your letter." Samuel closed his book slowly, studying the professor with cautious eyes. "I was quite clear in my response, Professor Whitcomb. The events here are not for academic dissection, and yet they are of profound importance," Whitcomb insisted, seating himself uninvited beside Samuel. "Not merely to theology, but to our understanding of the boundary between life and death itself. However, I must respectfully decline your request for a meeting. Some knowledge I have learned comes at too high a price, and some stories once told can inspire darkness as easily as light. The 17 children who died through my great-uncle's rituals have finally found peace. Their story belongs to this town and to the families who lost them. It is not mine to share beyond these boundaries. I would encourage you as a man of learning to consider that not all mysteries require solving, and not all power deserves pursuing. Sometimes the most profound wisdom lies in knowing when to close a door rather than open it. Respectfully, Samuel Mercer. Spring 1888, Athens, Ohio. The Johnson Memorial Garden bloomed with new life as winter's grip finally released the land. Conventional flowers now grew alongside the mysterious blossoms that had first appeared after the house's destruction. Some boundaries are not meant to be explored, Samuel replied. Science and faith advance only by challenging such limitations. Whitcomb gestured toward the memorial markers. Your great-uncle, for all his moral failings, was attempting something revolutionary, creating a bridge between realms without the passage of death. A chill ran through Samuel, despite the warm spring air. How do you know the specifics of his ritual? The journals were destroyed. Whitcomb smiled thinly. Elliot Johnson corresponded with several theological scholars during his studies. I've spent years collecting these letters, piecing together his theories. He lowered his voice. But what I lack is an eyewitness account of the ritual's conclusion, which you, uniquely, can provide. You misunderstand my role, Samuel said carefully. I ended a terrible wrong. I didn't witness some grand theological experiment. But you saw the other side, did you not? The children's spirits, the collapse of the bridge, the final passage beyond. Whitcomb leaned closer, his scholarly demeanor giving way to intense fervor. Do you realize what this confirms? The existence of the soul, the reality of an afterlife, empirical evidence of what religions have merely claimed on faith. Samuel stood abruptly. I think you should leave, Professor. Whitcomb rose as well, his expression hardening. Consider carefully, Mr. Mercer, your great-uncle's work need not be remembered as mere atrocity. With proper refinement, ethical application, there is no ethical application for what he did, Samuel interrupted. He murdered 17 children for his ambition. Regrettable means for a transcendent end, Whitcomb argued. But we could find another way. The bridge concept remains sound, even if no bridge should exist, Samuel stated firmly. Life and death, separate realms. There's wisdom in that natural division. A tense silence fell between them. Around them, the strange flowers seemed to pulse slightly, as if responding to the conflict. Finally, Whitcomb straightened his coat with deliberate calm. I had hoped for cooperation, but I'm prepared to continue without it. The Johnson ritual will be reconstructed, Mr. Mercer, if not with your help, then through other means. As he turned to leave, Samuel called after him. You'll find nothing here, Professor. No power, no bridge, no shortcut to divinity. Only a memorial to innocence lost and a warning against the very arrogance you're displaying. Whitcomb paused but didn't turn back. We shall see. After the professor departed, Samuel remained in the garden until sunset, troubled by the encounter. As darkness fell, he made his way to Agnes Holloway's cottage at the edge of town. The elderly midwife listened gravely to his account of Whitcomb's visit. I feared this might happen, she said when he finished. Knowledge of great power rarely remains buried forever, especially when pieces of it exist in multiple places. He mentioned letters from my great-uncle to other scholars. Samuel confirmed. Agnes nodded grimly. Elliot Johnson sought validation from learned men who shared his obsessions. If this professor has collected that correspondence, could he actually reconstruct the ritual? Samuel asked. Perhaps. The basic elements might be there in the letters, but, double quotes, she hesitated. There's one component he cannot obtain. What's that? Johnson blood, Agnes stated. You're the last of the line, Samuel. The ritual required Johnson blood to create the bridge, and Johnson blood to complete or destroy it. Without that specific lineage, the ritual is just empty words and gestures. Samuel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, then just as quickly return. So as long as I live, you remain a target for anyone seeking to recreate your great-uncle's work, Agnes confirmed. And should you ever have children, they too would carry this burden. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He paced his small house, considering his options. Confronting Whitcomb directly would only lend credence to the professor's dangerous curiosity. Authorities would dismiss tales of supernatural rituals as superstition. The burden of preventing history's repetition fell to him alone. Near dawn, exhausted but resolute, Samuel made his decision. He wrote 2 letters, one to the university resigning his position, and another to Agnes explaining his intentions. Then he packed a single bag, withdrew his savings from the bank, and purchased a ticket on the morning train to St. Louis. Samuel Mercer would disappear, taking the Johnson bloodline far from Athens, far from ambitious men like Whitcomb. He would change his name, create a new identity, and ensure that no children would inherit his cursed legacy. The Johnson line would end with him, and with it, the possibility of completing Elliot's terrible bridge. As the train pulled away from the station, Samuel watched the town of Athens recede into the distance. He thought of the 17 children finally at peace, of Elizabeth Johnson released from her spectral vigil, of the garden blooming where suffering had once reigned. Some doors were meant to remain closed, some bridges were never meant to be built, and sometimes the greatest service to humanity was not to advance knowledge, but to ensure that certain discoveries remained forever lost. In his pocket, he carried a single bloom from the mysterious flowers that had first appeared in the ruins of Johnson Manor, reminder of both the tragedy he had inherited and the healing he had helped bring about. As Ohio gave way to Indiana and then to Illinois, the flower remained as fresh as when he had picked it, glowing faintly in the darkness of night. The Johnson ritual would never be completed now. The bridge between worlds would remain broken, the natural order preserved. And somewhere in the vast expanse of America, the last Johnson would live out his days in quiet anonymity, guardian of a secret better left forgotten. In Athens, the Memorial Garden continued to bloom, season after season, year after year, a place of remembrance, of warning, and ultimately of peace.